hour early this morning.
At least 38 people, including 2 medical workers, died. 3 people managed to escape. One source says the hospital had bars on its windows. Authorities are looking into the cause of that fire. Some believe a short circuit may have started that blaze.
People in Spain are hoping for a quiet day after thousands of protesters gathered outside the Spanish parliament yesterday when they heard the news that more than 6 million Spaniards are unemployed. It's the highest unemployment rate ever recorded at 27.2% in the first quarter of this year. 1,400 riot police were deployed around the parliament, and lawmakers canceled their session for the day. Spain's been in recession for much of the last 4 years now as it struggles to deal with a real estate collapse. The government's handling of that crisis has sparked almost daily protests.
Demonstrations took place in the capital of Bangladesh over a building collapse that killed nearly 300 people this week. Protesters threw rocks and clashed with police out of anger over the working conditions in the garment industry. Meanwhile, rescue workers continued to bring survivors from the rubble 2 days after the building collapsed. It's still unclear how many people were inside when the building collapsed. 2,200 people have been rescued, and the death toll has reached at least 291. A fire in an industrial zone in Liberia's capital left at least 3 people dead, including firefighters. That fire began Wednesday night in a commercial district of the city. Liberian police say they recovered at least 3 bodies from the scene, and more than 10 are feared trapped under the rubble. A UN radio station confirmed that 2 of the dead are firefighters. Family members are also at the site helping search for their missing relatives.
5:15 now, 72 degrees. Negotiators for FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, thanked a group of U.S. Congress members for voicing support for Colombia's peace process. FARC praised 62 members of Congress who wrote a letter to Secretary of State John Kerry expressing their support to find a political solution to this decades-old conflict. One of the peace negotiators read an official statement from the rebel group before they entered a round of peace talks with the Colombian government. The government and the rebels resumed those peace talks this week after a month-long break. The two sides are nearing an agreement on land reform, which is one of the major issues of these talks. And Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Martin Dempsey touched on Syria during a press conference in Tokyo. The White House says the U.S. now believes the Syrian government has used chemical weapons against its own people. President Obama said the use of chemical weapons is crossing a red line. When reporters asked Dempsey whether arming Syrian rebels or establishing no-fly zones would be effective, he said he didn't decide on policy. Time now to head back over to meteorologist Juan Acuna with your weather on the 6s.
Good morning, everyone. A happy Friday to you. We made it to the end of the work week, and still pretty mild out there right now. We started off cool for the past couple of mornings, but right now we're back into the 70s here in South Texas. Again, 72 here. We're actually the warmest temperature all across the state. You can see basically 40s, 50s, and 60s. 40s out in West Texas around Marfa, 50s up into the Panhandle, and we have 60s up towards the Dallas-Fort Worth area, even out in San Antonio, a good 9 degrees cooler than we are. Even look at Brownsville. They're holding on to a few clouds as well at 63 degrees, and those dew points are up there as well into the 70s, so very, very, very muggy outside. Completely different from yesterday and even on into Wednesday and Tuesday of this past week across the region. So versus your previous mornings, maybe going out for that morning jog, you are certainly going to feel that moisture in the air as we continue to have a southeast wind pumping in that moisture across the region. So what's good to know across the area, again, we have some dense fog across the region. Some dense fog advisories are in effect for our southern counties across the region, and some of those visibility values are dropping below 1/4 of a mile across the region. So be careful on your morning commute. The clouds will start to break this afternoon across the region, and scattered showers will remain in the forecast as we head towards the extended. And again, here the southeast winds at about 10 to 15 miles an hour across the region. They will pick up to breezy levels later on this afternoon. You can see a southeast wind kicking up about 20 miles an hour sustained, and those will gust around 30. So the city-by-city forecast will look for 83 today in Corpus Christi, 78 in Rockport, 77 out in Port Aransas. Again, we'll look for some afternoon sunshine across the region as well. Have another weather update for you at about 5:26.
Juan, thanks. Proof you always have to be careful no matter where you go. At a charity event in Tampa, Florida last week, a $5,000 diamond was a kind of a special prize of the event, and the organizers thought it would be cute if they dropped it in a flute of champagne along with every other person's champagne glass with a dummy diamond, but a real one in one. Well, the woman who won the real diamond didn't realize it, so she drank the champagne.
Uh-oh. You don't want to do that.
The organizers never heard the scream of delight, so they eventually figured this out. that the champagne had been consumed. The diamond was in the elderly woman, Marion, the winner. But as luck turned out, she already had a colonoscopy scheduled for the following day.
Goodness.
So before the procedure, she apparently told the doctors they should, quote, keep their eyes out for an unusual object inside her rectum.
Did they find it?
They did.
Okay.
And she
so
took it to
maybe-
a jeweler to get appraised before it was cleaned, by the way.
Oh.
But she's $5,000
Before
richer.
it was cleaned. It's breakfast time for some people.
Not
out there,
anymore.
Dave.
Legendary singer Neil Diamond will donate the proceeds from a week of sales of his 1969 classic Sweet Caroline to the victims of the Boston Marathon bombings. Diamond announced he'd donate all the royalties from that song to One Fund Boston, which is helping those bombing victims. According to Nielsen SoundScan, I guess because it's more in the public's attention this past week, sales of Sweet Caroline reached 19,000 this past week. The song, as many know, has become a standard over the years at Boston Red Sox games.
Apple's marking the 10th anniversary of iTunes with a collection of songs and multimedia features marking the past decade of online music service. Apple calls a decade of iTunes an entertaining multimedia timeline that includes notable releases, the top-selling songs and albums from each year of the store's existence. Also has some other bits of information, such as when iTunes sold its 1 billionth song. Since 2003, iTunes sold more than 25 billion songs on the internet. All right, 5:19 now. Coming up on 5:20, let's check in with Rachel Colfer. Look at some of the stories happening now. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Well, everybody may or may not have heard of Jodi Arias. This story is coming out of Arizona, where the murder trial is going on for her right now. Now, a third juror was dismissed just a week before this case goes into closing arguments. Now, the man known as juror number 8, who has taken notes and sat through this entire trial as question goes on for these witnesses, was dismissed today without comment from Judge Sherry Stevens. Now, he is the third juror to be dismissed. As I said, proceedings will continue, and as I said, they're going into closing arguments. 15 jurors will listen to the rest of the trial, and 12 will deliberate. I'm Rachel Cole at the Happening Now desk. Back over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Well, coming up, the search continues for evidence that other crimes might have been committed in the controversial Ohio rape case.
Plus, investigators believe they now know the cause of an explosion and fire on a fuel barge in Alabama. It's 5:20 on your Friday morning.
Credit amnesty is now in effect.